New York in the 1950s. We've been here before. We've visited the exquisitely production-designed world of 2015's Carol, which beautifully and faithfully recreated 1952 New York City by way of Cincinnati, and DECOY, the groundbreaking 1957 police drama starring Beverly Garland as policewoman Casey Jones. But as DECOY was airing on television screens across America, On the Bowery, a small independent docudrama, was making the circuit at various international film festivals and showing another side of New York City. It took viewers down to a neighborhood in the city's Lower East Side, and it pulled no punches. This was not manufactured or production designed grit and squalor. This was the real thing. This was the real life of people on the fringes, an urban environment populated by men living on the very edge of society. In its brief 62 minutes, it chronicles the everyday existence of the men who drink their nights away in shady taverns and sleep rough on the streets or in flop houses, and take up day work, if they're sober enough, just to earn enough money for the next night's drinking. On the Bowery shatters whatever rose-colored glasses one may wear when looking back on the past. It lifts the cloud of nostalgia to remind us how easy it is to forget that struggle and suffering is not unique to our age. And it shows us that when popular images of the past, especially ones disseminated in motion pictures and television, are scrubbed clean of street-level reality, it can distort how we contextualize our history. This is only one side of the 1950s. This is another. On the Bowery was directed and produced by Lionel Rogosin, a Yale-educated son of a textile mogul. He had served in the Navy during World War II, and following the war, before taking a waiting job in his father's factory, he traveled through the devastated and bombed-out countries of Eastern Europe and throughout Africa, seeing firsthand the effects of colonialism and imperialism. He'd studied to be a chemical engineer, but by the early 50s, he'd begun to express a growing concern over racism and fascism. So, he taught himself how to use a camera, and in 1954 he left the family business to devote himself to promoting peace and confronting the pressing issues of his day, like the threat of nuclear war, imperialism, and racism. Apartheid was to be his first target, but in order to make a film against it, he had to learn how to make a film, and he decided to learn by going down to the Bowery, New York's Skid Row. By the turn of the last century, the place had gained a reputation, and by 1930, the Bowery was home to 14,000 homeless people, mostly men. And in 1954, this is the place where Lionel Rogosin came to make his first documentary. Inspired by the work of the Italian neorealist directors like Roberto Rossellini and Vittorio De Sica, as well as Louis Milestone's 1930 version of All Quiet on the Western Front, Rogosin set to work documenting life on the Bowery. And while researching for the film, he got to know the street and the men intimately, befriending Ray Salyer as he was seeking day labor, and Gorman Hendricks, a longtime Bowery resident and former newspaper reporter. And it's around these two men that Rogosin crafted his story. This film isn't a straight documentary, it's a docudrama, and the plot loosely revolves around Ray Salyer, a former railroad worker who has recently moved to the Bowery and still has enough money to buy drinks for his fellow derelicts on his first night there. However, after blacking out, Ray discovers that all his possessions have been stolen. And as he tries to extricate himself from life on the Bowery, he becomes friends with Gorman, a petty thief. And Ray, as he looks for work, drinks his nights away, goes to the local mission, gets into fights, and eventually succumbs to his surroundings. And Rogosin covertly captures the desperate real lives going on around this story. To get true scenes of Bowery life, cameraman Dick Bagley hid his 35mm camera under a bundle to shoot in the bars, and sometimes they filmed from the backseat of cars. The actors for the film were taken off the street and spoke their own lines, and were only guided in what to say or given the scenario that was going to play out.
The minute you come to the front door in the evening, at 6 o'clock, to come down here, the man will see whether you've had a drink or not. If you're under the influence of liquor, you cannot sleep in the dormitory.
When filming began, the 3rd Avenue L had ceased running, but it had not yet been demolished, so its dark shadows added to the overall dingy atmosphere. And this place is unlike anything I've ever seen. On my first viewing, I was shocked at how raw and desperate the entire thing feels. We are seeing real people here, most of them in life and death battles with alcoholism. There are no studio sets. On the Bowery is where they sleep and eat if they can get a meal, but mostly it's where they drink. Theirs is a struggle for a type of survival, and it's unfamiliar to a lot of us. Critics of the time, of course, found the downbeat subject matter gloomy, and they're not wrong. But like life, not all stories have a happy ending, and not all lives are lived in CinemaScope and Technicolor. After the film's nomination for Best Documentary at the 1957 Academy Awards, and its Best Documentary win at the Venice Film Festival, Ray Salyer was offered $40,000 by a Hollywood studio to come to California. And he is charismatic with a natural talent and the look of a typical 1950s male star. You could see why the studios would be interested. But he turned them down, preferring to stay on the Bowery. Gorman Hendricks died in New York of cirrhosis of the liver just weeks before the film opened. Rogosin took care of his burial. Ray Salyer died in New York City from the effects of alcoholism in 1963. Rogosin would go on to make his anti-apartheid documentary, the critically acclaimed Come Back Africa, as well as others. And the Bowery? Well, just like Hendricks and Salyer, the L tracks are long gone, and so are all those men who lived on the fringes. There are 8 million stories in the cinema cities. This has been one.